very, very high quality life in terms of relationships. And so that makes me feel successful. I could, care less about what my career says about me. I just know from my own happiness that, I feel successful just because I'm living a very joyful life.
You may have heard the rumor or legend of sorts that certain cultures throughout history have been at least suspicious or cautious about photography in fear that something of the human soul was captured in the process. Well, the other side of that coin is that to many purveyors of the arts, a great portrait does exactly that. I came across Jeremy Cowart's work in the weeks and months after a horrific earthquake nearly flattened Port-au-Prince, Haiti, in January of 2010. With that project, entitled Voices of Haiti, Jeremy captured, set against the backdrop of a devastating natural disaster, this very human picture, one with a lot of soul. His work since then has continued to range between photo shoots with some of the most recognizable names in entertainment to the development of a hotel that will, when it comes to life, revolutionize the way we stay somewhere when we're not home. Check it out. So your there's sort of the tagline that you've associated with yourself. You talk about that your desire, your mission, in fact, is to explore the intersection of creativity and empathy.
Yep.
And I've been really interested in this conversation. It's a pretty broad public conversation about empathy, about the word empathy, the practice, the concept of empathy. And a lot of the conversations revolving on like whether or not people actually have either you have empathy or you don't have empathy. It's either something you have a capacity for, it's what you're sort of wired for this, or you're not. You seem to be prescribing empathy as a kind of practice, a thing that can be learned. Can you talk about, like, when you talk about, the intersection of creativity and empathy, what does the empathy part of that mean for you? And then, and I can follow this up in a minute, but insofar as like, what's empathy mean for you? How does what you do foster that or plant that in other people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the very definition of empathy is to understand and share the feelings of other people. And so I've just found that it's more fulfilling in my line of work to do things that help people, do things that that point to the world, and not, continuing this. The nature of being a photographer and being an artist is very selfish. It's look at me, look at all the cool things I make and do. And so I've just found over time, over the last 10 years, that the things I'm most proud of are the times and projects where I did something to help others or to point to the need of others. And so, and then I've also found that when people help, whether it's Red Cross or all these massive organizations, the work they do is extraordinary. It's amazing. And we need large organizations. But I would argue that it's usually, doing the things that are obvious, the raising money, people helping with their hands and rebuilding, providing food and shelter. All those things are obviously extraordinarily crucial, but there's rarely new ideas being injected into times of need. And so we live in such a technological, fascinating time that I'm always like, what new can be done that hasn't been thought of before to help in times of need? Where does creativity and empathy, how do those mix together? And there's very few people, at least from my perspective, kind of exploring that. Like, what does it mean to bring creativity into these situations? And so it's taken me a long time to kind of come to that point and realize that's what I'm essentially trying to do in all that I do, whether it's a humanitarian photography project or building a hotel.
Right.
But that's really where we'll explore on the hotel front for sure.
So you're talking about when it comes to folks responding to the world around them, there are these set ways. Like, you can sponsor a child, you can support a school, you can, like, here are the things that are available in front of you. You're wanting to kind of set a tone of creating ways to enter in instead of just like kind of using it like it's like a different marketplace, right? Like, well, here are ways to go shopping. Here are the shoes that are available to you. Here are the shirts that are available to you. And then here are the charities that are available to you. You're sort of saying in a sense like, well, you can kind of make your own Christmas gifts. You can kind of build your own charitable path here as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Elon Musk is definitely the ultimate example of this, because he's using what they're doing at Tesla. He's going in and rebuilding Puerto Rico's power grid. I mean, how insanely amazing is that?
Right. Yes.
Like that's the ultimate example. And so, and by no means am I comparing myself to Elon Musk, but in a very small, individual level, I'm always at least trying to think like what's something new that people haven't thought of before, right, that can creatively help. And I did a project in Gatlinburg a couple of years ago where I used a drone and a mattress to tell the story of the victims of the wildfires. And that, because I told the story in a different way, there were tons of people with drones there, but I was the only one photographing the homeowners laying in their former homes on a stark white mattress in a black and brown charred home. And I was able to show emotion from 300 feet above, from a drone perspective. And that went a long way. It was featured on Time Magazine and USA Today and the Weather Channel. And now there's a permanent memorial installed in the mountains of Gatlinburg of my project. Yeah. And with each post, we would point people to the crowdfunding pages of each individual. So it was a pretty different way to point eyeballs at the needs.
Yeah, and you said something a moment ago about the selfish nature of art and what you're doing with some of your projects, at least, to sort of contrast that. Can you dig a little bit more into what you mean when you talk about the selfish nature of art? You said art is photography and art can be and often is really selfish and kind of look at me, look what I've done. Can you talk a bit like what do you see around you? Like what do you mean when you say that this art is selfish? Because oftentimes when artists talk about their art, it's very it's sacrificial. It's what they're putting into it. It's about they've got all this work and all these things that they've sacrificed in order to make art happen. You're talking about sort of this element of art in relationship to culture that is selfish. Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously I'm painting with very broad brushes here and that's stereotyping a bit, but
it's good. By all means, please stereotype. Let's roll with it.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to do that. I mean, obviously art can be a million different things, but in general, especially in these very visual times we're living in, where everybody's staring at each other's lives all day. Everybody wants to be a rock star photographer or a rock star musician, rock star, so they can quote unquote build their brand and be famous and have followers. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just the nature of, but also think there's a very, speaking from a personal level, it is just a passion. Like I was passionate about art in 7th grade long before technology and social media and anything existed. I just loved to draw. It was a very natural, thing. But yeah, I think any art, you're creating art to show people, to share it, and it's both beautiful, but there is a side of it that I think is very just naturally like, look at me, here's what I'm putting out into the world. And so I've done that for a long time, and all I'm saying is that after a while it gets old to continue pointing at myself and look at me, look how cool I am, look at the people I photographed. I'd rather focus on something that's much bigger than myself, that doesn't involve my name, that just, puts something out into the world that can potentially help a lot of people.
So you talked a little bit about you started off drawing. You have you even call them kind of these fine art projects, and then you have photography. Yeah, you do quite a bit. I want to talk about a couple of things you do. Your creative process, the way you actually go about things, between creating fine art and shooting photography, there are similarities or commonalities. Can you talk about like your emotional experience of those processes? Like when you're creating a fine art piece versus you're shooting shooting a series or doing portraits. Is that are you in a different emotional space doing those two things? Is that like, does it feel like two different animals? What's that like?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm doing a commercial photo shoot, you're a hired gun. You're there to execute somebody else's vision and, achieve a goal for them. But yeah, when I'm doing these personal projects, my goal is to actually help. I don't want to just be another photographer or artist trying to point at myself through these things. I want the project to, like the Gallenberg thing that led to raising a lot of money for the individuals. And so that's always my goal. And so I just, but it's also, I have to kind of keep my emotions out of it because I'm there to get my own vision accomplished. And, if you get too caught up in the story, most of these projects are extremely limited on time. It's like the Gallenberg thing. We were only there for 4 days. And so each day was full of shooting. So there's not a lot of time to sit in the story. So you got to keep going. And so
it sounds like a bit of a trick though, right? In terms of like you need to be emotionally engaged enough to care about the thing, but not so much that you get lost in it.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's it look like for you to navigate that?
I don't really know. Honestly, it's not something I really think about. You just go do it. It's instinctual. You show up, and I'm always very purposeful in showing the people that I do care about them. I want to hear their stories. I want to hear about them, but then it's right to business. All right, let's shoot. Let's do the interview, whatever it is I'm doing, let's get right to business. And then I thank them and move on. And, but then I'm pointing back to them. I'm trying to help them raise more money or rebuild their home, whatever it is we're doing. But yeah, it's always, pretty crazy in terms of the production schedule.
Yeah, because you can tell the difference. Well, I'd say it seems to me like I can tell the difference between a project that has been overwrought with or that is like emotionally driven, and and not that it's altogether all that bad, but there's a difference between something that has an emotional center and something that is like almost purely emotional and emotionally driven, where like maybe there's a kind of a lack of finish to it, or doesn't feel like. Yeah, it feels perhaps more amateurish, and maybe that just comes with having done a lot of work before, as opposed to kind of just being sort of the front end and being swept up by the emotion of the project. Is that part of your journey, but having done a lot of the shooting before, and then moving into this place where you're more emotionally focused? Is that part of the process for you?
Yeah, I would say so. It's just a part of maturing and getting older, and just realizing that's more and more the kind of work I want to do, for sure.
Yeah. One of the other elements of that work for you that, excuse me, one of the other elements of that work that I've paid attention to of yours has to do with kind of maybe the line between, or not crossing line from like exploration and exposure to something like exploitation, where there's sort of this use or this kind of kind of disregard of a subject or of a person. Like, do you find, like, where do you find that line in you where you are in a place where, like, the Voices of Haiti project was the first time I came in contact with your work. And I remember being struck by it never felt like there was this exploitative element to what you were doing, but those images in that project could very well have been this like really exploitative project from top to bottom. Like in you, do you find that temptation? Do you come across that emotionally where like you have to like taper back from some kind of angle in relationship to shoot, or like what's that look like for you? Like how do you avoid exploitation when you're exposing like folks who are in need to the folks who aren't?
Yeah, I'm just very aware of the idea that I could be exploiting people. So it's always the first question I'm asking: how do I go into this situation not to exploit people? And even with the best intentions, a lot of times people think you are still there just to exploit them and take advantage of them. And so it's all about, communication and walking up to people without a camera and just talking to them and getting to know them first, putting the cameras away and just being, just loving people, just being honest and real. And, if somebody walked up in my backyard with a camera, I'd be pretty freaked out too.
Right. Yes.
Get off my lawn is what I'd be saying. But,
yeah.
So you have to really approach people with the soft listening heart for sure.
Yeah. And even so far, like your work among folks who've been either affected by, like in that case, earthquakes or poverty, like that's a place in which the term exploitation comes up, but not as much in the celebrity culture. But you've also you've shot a lot in celebrity culture, where actually exploitation might play like a larger role in the dehumanization of subjects, where there is this pervasive dehumanizing of popular, successful, beautiful people. You work because you work on both ends of that spectrum of those who've been disenfranchised and disregarded, and those who are celebrated, maybe even over celebrated. Can you talk about like that same kind of thing? Like, it's a little bit different, right? Or maybe it isn't, to like be, I don't know, human and have those conversations and have that kind of engagement on the celebrity end of things? Or is it really the same? You're functioning in the same way?
I mean, I guess kind of in the same way. They're just 9 day different. When I shoot celebrities, it's part of a campaign, a photo shoot. It's all business, So a lot of times I don't even have time to talk to them. A lot of times I do, a lot of times I don't. Just depends on the shoot, but they're all just work. It's just another business day. They do photo shoots all the time. So,
right. Which is part of what made that John Schneider moment significant for you, right? Was, and maybe if you don't mind, and I'll have a few listeners, I'm sure, who aren't familiar with how that went down. We'll link that from the website. But can you talk about what happened in the moment with John Schneider, and maybe like how that was different, and how that maybe, I don't know, affected or changed the way you saw that world? Or
yeah, I was doing a big TV shoot for Discovery Channel, and John Schneider was one of the actors. And those days are crazy because there's just tons and tons of people. It's a huge budget, probably 15 actors, but then you've got producers and managers and publicists and assistants and hair and makeup and wardrobe and prop stylist, and just massive, probably 200 to 300 people in these sound stages. And so you're just cranking it out. You're just going through the motions and trying to stay on schedule and be sure everybody's taken care of. So yeah, I was shooting John, and he was doing an amazing job, pouring himself into the camera, being funny, being just really entertaining. And then we were done, and then he kind of whispered in my ear. He's like, "Hey, can we shoot just a few more?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And then he walked back on camera and essentially like started crying. He had been doing these impressions of presidents before, so I thought his tears were another impression.
He was doing presidential impressions?
Yeah, just he's like, "Here's my Reagan, here's my Obama, here's my Bush," just really being goofy. And so when he started crying, I was like, man, that's impressive for him to be able to just like immediately start crying. But after a couple minutes, I realized that those tears were real. He really was upset about something. So I just walked up to him and I hugged him, and he told me at that point, he said his dad had just died in the last hour.
Yeah.
And he had to fly out immediately. So he left straight from me photographing him to fly to the airport to get out of there. And so, yeah, that was an extraordinarily rare moment that doesn't happen. So yeah, it was really beautiful, and we've stayed in touch since then. And he allowed me to share the story and share the images, which was great.
Did that change anything for you in terms of the way you engage with folks on the celebrity end of things, like from an emotionally centered place, or was it just that, was that more of a singular moment, and that like you don't really, not that you expect that, or but did that alter anything for you?
No, I don't think so. Because I always approach people the same way. I mean, the demeanor I have right now in the shoot. I mean, in this interview is how I am on photo shoots. And so it was cool that he opened up like that, and I was really thankful for it. But yeah, I don't know that it changed anything. I mean, I'm always aware that we're all human and we're all, in this together, and that, pain is pain, and, joy is joy. Like all of them, we're all the same in that way.
Yeah. One of the conversations we've had over the course of the last season of the podcast has had to do with the use of and in human engagement over social media. And you used this phrase in one of your talks. It might have been your TED Talk, in which you talked about the opportunity we have to document our wisdom. And you said, which is sort of a different take on the use of social media than maybe the vast majority of the take, where there's sort of maybe more of a suspicion, like it is more that sort of self-centered, look at me kind of thing. You talk about documenting your wisdom, and I think your phrase was like, someday your grandchildren will Google you was the phrase, which is like, that's a little bit terrifying depending on what it is that you've been doing online. But can you talk about your use of social media, the way you engage, and like, do you remember using the phrase, by the way, documenting our wisdom? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. I shared that in my life story, which I present all the time. In fact, yesterday I was in Chicago. I told my story 3 times for 3 different church services. And so it's something that it's a thought that I'm always sharing. But yeah, like, if you think about it, like, we don't really know our grandparents, and especially our great grandparents and their parents. Like, we know nothing about our, where we come from, really, unless people like research it to the nth degree. But, I have good memories of my grandfather, but I don't feel like I knew him extraordinarily well.
Right.
And I certainly don't know much at all about my great grandfather or great grandmother. But yeah, there's coming a day soon, if you think about it, where it's like our grandkids will be able to, like, I'm sure there'll be technology by then where they'll be able to pull up any date ever in our lives and know specifically what happened on that singular day, which that to me is just mind blowing.
Yeah.
They'll be able to read everything. They'll know everything about us, which is just like the most weird, strange, surreal, like, I just can imagine like my great grandkids having to do like college reports on me and what was my life like. And so I'm always kind of like in the back of my head thinking about, man, of course I think about like, what do my followers and the public think of me, but I'm always even more thinking about like, what is my future family going to think of me? When they read like, even this year in this crazy political season, our grandkids will be able to like find out what we thought of the 2016 election.
Yeah.
Which is just mind blowing. Like, how cool would it be to Google what my grandfather thought of like the 1940 whatever election, Right. So yeah, I think there'll be these time capsules invented, by Twitter and Facebook, where you're able to go back 30 years, pick a specific date. What was your grandfather or grandmother saying on that specific day?
So, I mean, you're talking about using your social media space to, in a sense, kind of record, or it's a legacy practice for you then.
Yeah.
Like that's a way for you to intentionally leave a legacy for folks. And you're conscious of that as you're going about doing what you're doing online.
And even like this podcast, like one day if this podcast is still out there, they'll go back and be able to like at different phases through my career as I venture into this hotel journey. Like, I love doing podcasts because they're like little audio journals along the way,
Yeah.
And even over the last 2 years, it'd be interesting for me to go back and listen because I change all the time. I'm not a consistent, I'm so ADD that, every 6 months I have a different, kind of goal and vision for my life. It's kind of crazy. And so anyway, but yeah, audio interviews I think are really interesting in that sense too.
Where's that? How does your family play into that then as well? Like there's kind of a constant tension for folks who may be slightly more public or maybe a bit more well known. Like, are you pretty intentional about like what you share about your family and like pictures of your kids and of your wife? Like how, like, or is it just sort of, is that a substantial element of what you're doing online, or like how do you navigate you sharing stuff that's maybe it's not just personal to you, but it's like someone else's person, because like, your kids are personal to you, but they are also persons. Like, how do you, as someone who's got folks with eyes on him, how do you navigate, your kids being exposed to the folks who are paying attention to your work?
Yeah, that's a hard one, and I'm always kind of self-analyzing, because on one hand, obviously I don't want to exploit my kids and make my whole thing about my kids. I have friends that do that, and but then you could argue like it's really amazing for America or the rest of the world to see healthy families, because I think to a large degree there's so many broken marriages that people don't get to see enough healthy, balanced families who are happy. And so sometimes, I do put my family out there just to show, I have a really healthy marriage of 18 years and I have really happy kids, and our house is honestly just a big house of joy all the time. And anytime I do share that, people, I get by far more response to sharing photos of my kids or my family than I do any of my most creative work I've ever done.
Which is, if we're talking about legacy, and the work you're putting in and the work you're doing in the world, there's not altogether that thick block of line between the work you're making as a dad and the work you're making as an artist. Like so in a sense, you're, if people are responding, they're still responding to the work you're doing and to the work of your life.
Yeah, for sure. But it's always still like kind of frustrating. Like for example, I recently did a hurricane project, and we were spending, from 7 p.m. till 3 a.m. at night out in the middle of these hurricane waters infested with crocodiles and snakes, shooting this really difficult work, long shutter speeds, projecting type in the middle of the night, just crazy, technically creative work that was really difficult to say the least. And I'd post those, and on Instagram they would get like maybe 500 to 1,000 likes and a few comments. And then right after that, I posted a photo of my kids from Halloween, and it got 6,000 likes and like hundreds of comments.
Yes.
Like 10 to 20 times the engagement of like this heart work that I just did, for the hurricane disasters. And so, but at the same time, like, I'm going to get it. People want to peer into our personal lives. But still, it's still frustrating all the time.
So there are a couple elements of your I'm Possible that I wanted to dig into a little bit. The one had to do with, in a sense, it's not a phrase you use. I'm using the word, kind of various forms of intelligence. You're talking about, and it's a little bit cliched to some degree, but you were not a great student, and then you found things that you were honestly good at, that didn't make you feel dumb, because you was like, here's this test, and taking the test, you're getting 5s and 15s and 10s out of 100, etc. And feeling dumb. Can you talk about like not just in your work, but in your experience with people, like this sort of running into kind of various forms of intelligence, ways in which like people are, how do I say it? So like as a college student, you move into college, and there's a particular metric by which you're measured, and culture tends to have these like very particular metrics by which people are measured in terms of their worth and their value. You've had a journey in which you've had to navigate's the word I keep using. You've had to wrestle through like understanding your own self as a person of value and a person of intelligence. Can you maybe begin kind of by retelling that story a little bit, but then talk about kind of the various forms of intelligence you found in yourself, and ways in which like you've learned to value you as a person, and you've learned to value other folks?
Maybe repeat that again. I'm trying to understand the question.
Yeah. So, and I wrote this down late last night. So it goes like this: like in your I'm Possible video, you talk about not being a good student. And feeling at times stupid, and because the test basically says, "Hey, you're dumb. Like you're not smart. Here you're getting 5s and 10s and 15s out of 100." And you've had to learn to recognize yourself as not just intelligent, but capable and even powerful. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that journey for you, because in a sense you're talking about there are different ways, different kind of forms of intelligence, different ways to understand yourself as valuable, as intelligent, and as powerful. Can you talk a little bit about your journey in that direction, and even once you discovered the arts? Because it wasn't just like, well, I'm not great academically, but I am an artist, and now I'm done. Like, what's it look like for you to develop a sense of your own value as a person in the practice of art and in work?
Yeah, sorry. When you first said that, I was being a little ADD.
No, it's totally fine.
I glanced at something else and then got off.
I get that.
Yeah, no, it really is a lifelong journey, and it's crazy sad that the education system, ironically, teaches kids that if you're not at the top of the class, if you're not a straight A student, then you're not great. If you're a B, you're average. If you're C, or I guess if you're C, you're average. And if you're an F, you're a failure. And I mean, my grading system, my whole life was A through F. And so, and granted, I was never a dropout. I was never a failure. I never made a lot of Fs, but I was just kind of, somewhere in the middle. Made a lot of Bs, made a lot of Cs, made Ds every now and then. But the important thing was the lesson that all that taught me. It was like, well, I guess if I'm an average student, I guess I'm an average human being. That was even out of college, that was still the key takeaway for me, is like, I'm just an average person. Like there's nothing great about what I'm going to offer to the world. And so, and it took a long time to realize how broken that idea is, how broken the idea is that a test score determines your value and your worth. And so, so many kids like myself just were not cut out for the traditional education system. I remember being in class and looking around and just like being blown away how all the other kids were just listening and taking notes. But I did not have the capacity or the ability to just listen and take notes. Like my mind would just wander my whole life, and my mind still wanders just like it did 2 seconds ago.
Right. Yeah.
And like that's just how my brain operates, because somebody says one thing that gives me ideas, and then I start dreaming. Like even in movies, I'm always asking my wife, wait, what's going on? Because the scene before, the way they were lighting it or the way they had designed it made me start drifting into my own little world, and then I get off the plot of the movie. And so
did you a second ago you joked a little bit, I think, but you talked about being kind of ADD or ADHD. Like, did you ever go and get a diagnosis? Because I think you and I are roughly the same age, and so it's not like when we were growing up they called, it was hyperactive disorder and all that kind of stuff. Kids weren't getting diagnosed to the same degree, the same rate. Did you ever go get a diagnosis in someone like learning disabilities or ADHD? Is that like a real thing for you?
No, I never got diagnosed as a kid. I don't think it was a thing when we were little. I don't remember when the first time I heard about it. Both of my older brothers were diagnosed officially as ADD. I never took any tests, but just based on everything I've read and all the symptoms. And I mean, every time I read, like I'll Google it every once in a while, and it's like 100% of the symptoms. It's like, yep. That's all me.
Yeah.
That's my life.
Yes.
But also, I think I've been afraid of like medicating, because I'm afraid it would affect my creativity, and maybe it wouldn't, but I did one day take it's the medicine my brother takes. I forget what it's called, and it was funny. He warned me. He's like, dude, this is gonna make you like really emotional. Like you're gonna wear your heart on your sleeve.
Oh, no.
I was like, no, I'll be fine. Not a big deal, So it was just one day, and so I took his whatever it was, and literally probably within 2 hours, I type like a novel of an email to like every guy in my life. Like, what am I doing with my career? Who am I? What is this all, like
Oh
just this
no.
hilarious, ridiculous, emotional email to all these guys. And of course, I'm super embarrassed that I did that. But it was just funny that my brother literally warned me about the very thing that I, of course, ended up doing.
That's really good.
Yeah. So.
But so you you moved from you were a student, you moved into art. Like, did you have to kind of how did you find in the arts maybe a different metric or different way to understand yourself as, cause this eventually as a conversation going to move into the idea of success here, because it's not like in academics, you're going to do well or do poorly and there's a metric and it's bad, and then you move into the arts and the metric is, it's just so much easier, and I find lots of value, because a lot of folks move into the arts and it's quite the opposite. Now all of a sudden they discover that they really want to be a photographer or a painter, an author, and the level of failure or the kind of personal toll that failure takes sort of maybe even strips them of that sense of value. So can you talk about your journey, moving into the arts, which is more personal for you than academics? What's it look like for you to have a metric for success and for personal value? Are you paying attention to that? Do you listen to your own soul? How do you what's that look like?
I don't know. I don't think much about it really. I guess success for me personally is just being able to, let these ideas that I have work, let them be born into the world. And right now, we got a massive idea to build a hotel, and it's a very, very long journey. And right now it does not feel like a success, even though I fully believe it will be. It's crazy. It's like we're building the Titanic from scratch. And, I hope that it's a success. I hope that there are hotels all over the world in 10 years, 10 to 15 years that are executing the vision that we've set forth. And so, yeah, but I feel successful, not in the career sense. When I think of my success, I think of a healthy marriage of 18 years and a really happy family, and a good community around me, friends that I can believe in and they believe in me, and a church that I love. And I've got a very, very high quality life in terms of relationships, and so that makes me feel successful. I could care less about what my career says about me. I just know from my own happiness that I feel successful just because I'm living a very joyful life.
That's how you're measuring this. You're not looking at numbers per se. You're it's not even the success or the accomplishment of a particular project. You're paying attention to the joy in your own life. Are you happy? That's kind of your metric. Yeah,
I think so. I don't have any kind of fancy, definition of success. I just know that my life is very, very quality, and just to have a marriage of 18 years in a relationship with my wife for 21 years, and the fact that we've maybe had 3 fights in 21 years and 4 kids that love each other and get along, and that's all signs of success.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
So when you're having conversations, because you'll end up in conversation with other photographers and other artists who are going to ask you about success and failure. If someone comes up to you and talks about hey, I'm struggling, I'm having a hard time, how are you just going to say hey, pay attention to your life? Are you happy? How would you coach someone who's struggling with the idea of being a successful artist? Would you help define that for somebody, or is that something you end up having to decide for yourself individually?
I think it's something everybody has to define for themselves, and there is no path to tell any artist. I mean, it's all based on the individual artist, because I think when those people are asking me, they're looking, how do I make a living doing this? And that answer is so different depending on the situation. It could be, well, you're living in the wrong market, or you're shooting the wrong type of work, or, it's just, that's such a complicated thing to answer. It all depends on the individual.
So you talked about in one of the other talks this this idea of sort of the camera and three different levels of culture. This is from a ways back, and there's this sort of that old. I don't know how old it is, but and maybe it's still kind of pervasive among some folks. But the whole idea that like certain tribes or of people wouldn't want their picture taken because it steals something of their soul. Like, so you didn't want their picture taken because their souls would be stolen by the camera. There is actually there's sort of this interesting cultural parallel there that the way we treat ourselves or treat others with, by the way we shoot ourselves or shoot one another does a little bit of this kind of dehumanizing, this kind of soul sucking effect to some degree. So you talk about the camera in three different levels of culture, sort of celebrity culture, friends and peers, and then those in need. And you looking for humanity and establishing humanity in all three of those facets. Can you break that back down again, or is that still something you kind of see or buy, like the camera at three different levels of culture?
It's funny. I don't ever remember talking about this. I've never thought of it in three different ways. But
oh, really?
I guess, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't say that. I mean, it actually makes sense, but that's new to me.
So I was watching this TED Talk with this guy named Jeremy Cowart, and he said he talked about the camera at three different levels of culture and the way the camera works at three different levels of culture. If you point the camera at a celebrity, that's sort of like there's a certain thing that happens. There's a certain posture they shift into. Whereas if you point a camera at friends or peers, then there's a kind of a different posture and the sort of the fake smile that comes up. Whereas when you point the camera at those in need, at people who like, there is this whole other kind of level of engagement, like folks who haven't, like with the Help Portrait Project, people who just don't have their picture taken. You don't remember this at all?
Well, the TED Talk was 10 years ago.
I know.
I can't remember what I said a week ago. So, yeah, I'm sure I did say that. That all sounds like me, but I had just completely forgotten about it.
Well, okay, so maybe we'll do this then. So I'll start the question over again and ask it more broadly then. It was the case, especially like many, many, many years ago, in which folks who weren't familiar with camera and camera technology would see someone with a camera and they would literally not want their picture taken because they didn't understand how it worked, and they felt like perhaps or believed somehow that like their soul would be captured or stolen by this device. And the sort of legend that Native American tribespersons wouldn't want their picture taken because it would steal their souls. There is also this cultural parallel in which the way we treat each other with the camera can do a little bit of that soul sucking thing as well, where we sort of dehumanize ourselves or one another by kind of putting on maybe some sort of a fake persona, and I'm not really myself in the way I communicate myself to the world through Instagram. Can you talk about your like the way in which you have attempted to or want to humanize, particularly those people living in need? And you can maybe in this context talk about like Help Portrait as a project that you found that pointing the camera at people who don't usually have the camera pointed at them, folks living on the street, had this like kind of this glorifying effect, this like really powerful humanizing effect among people in need. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's we've done it for almost 10 years now. And yeah, it's just amazing to see what happens when you not just take a picture of somebody in need, but you first dignify them by doing their hair and makeup, and in some cases giving them a dress to wear, clothes to wear, new clothes, and then they look and feel like $1 million, and then you take a picture and you show them. It's literally like they have never seen that person before.
Yeah.
And so people think it sounds so silly. Why would you take a picture of people in need? They don't need that,
Yeah.
But people's soul and their dignity is so much more important than having the next meal to eat. Well, I mean, obviously that's debatable. I'm not downplaying the basic needs for food and shelter, but I'm just saying that people so often overlook making people feel beautiful inside, and so we see people weep like endlessly weeping, seeing their photos for the first time, or going and finally getting a job, using their photo as their headshot. And so it's extraordinary. I mean, it's like a day. It's truly like a day of heaven, sitting around witnessing all these stories just unfolding. I mean, it's crazy. You almost have to see it to believe it.
Yeah, I would imagine. And part of what you get after there is this sort of more comprehensive understanding of what poverty actually is, that it's not a matter of necessarily having or not having stuff, although that's certainly an element because you want to be able to eat and have an education. But that sense of like understanding oneself, seeing oneself as beautiful, as worthwhile, like that's as much, if not maybe more so, an element to what poverty actually is, than like the absence of material goods or even to some degree opportunity. And you get the opportunity to chase that down with your work, which is part of where the hotel idea comes from, is to do something a little bit broader and bigger to address this really broad, large idea of poverty. Can you talk about the hotel?
Yeah, with the hotel, I mean, it's an endless way to help people, through our own city, through domestically, through other organizations in America and internationally. And so the goal is to have endless causes and nonprofits connected to each thing you touch in the hotel, whether it be the soaps or the linens or the furniture, or when you pay for the internet fee, that's fighting human trafficking. The rooms are sponsoring a child. When you order room service, you'll be feeding a child in need through Food for the Hungry. Mm-hmm. There's just going to be all these endless connections to reach out to the world around you, and hopefully in a very fun, inviting, celebratory, creative way, not just it's not going to be a sad hotel for sure.
Right. And the fact that it's a hotel, like, was that why a hotel? Like, how did that idea take shape?
Yeah. Super random. I had a meeting in a hotel years ago at the Standard in LA, and they had their room numbers designed like name tags. Like, hello, my name is room 121. And I just thought that was interesting. And for some reason that like stirred in me the idea, what if every room had a story that you felt attached to as the lonely traveler? How could you connect a lonely traveler to a lonely person around the world? And so that started the idea of child sponsorship. And as soon as I walked in the room, it was like a waterfall of ideas. I mean, it was instant. Just looked at everything. The art on the walls could come from humanitarian artists, the soaps and the furnitures and the candle and the desk and the internet fee. I mean, all of it hit me at once together. And so then I sat in fear of the idea for 3 years, before moving forward. And so yeah, we're finally truly really putting on the gas now and extremely focused on it. So I'm super excited.
Do you have an end date in mind? Do you have a launch date, and how do people pay attention to that? How do people keep track of what you're up to?
Yeah, it's interestingly enough, I've started journaling to the mailing list. We let it sit stagnant forever, but just recently I've started really kind of pouring myself into what we're doing in terms of letting our audience into the process, and it's been really fun. I just started that last week, and I've got hundreds and hundreds of emails since last Thursday from people that it's almost like the hotel is an NFL sports team. I mean, the response we've gotten, people are raving passionate about this idea. One person said, I want to live, eat, and breathe this hotel brand.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. So we're really, really excited. We know it's an idea that's going to work. We just still have to execute it, though, and figure it all out. So,
well, I love it. Well, hey, so if folks want to pay attention to you, folks want to specifically pay attention to what you're doing with the hotel and maybe even help get behind it, how does someone go about doing that?
Yeah, I'm at Jeremy Cowart on all the social networks. The Purpose Hotel is at The Purpose Hotel on all the social networks. website is thepurposehotel.com, and they can join the mailing list there. And all my other projects and ideas are on my website, jeremycowart.com. So, yeah, it's all pretty straightforward.
Yes, it is. Hey, man, thanks a ton for your time. Hope that I hope that the walking the desk situation works out for you. And if it does not, gosh, I really hope you capture that.
I know, right? Seriously.
It would be good. Thanks a ton,
man.
Thanks
for having. Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you'd like to follow up with anything Jeremy Cowart is doing, you can visit his website at jeremycowart.com. That's Jeremy, no E there, Jeremy Cowart, COWART.com. Past episodes and past seasons of the At Sea podcast are available at atseapodcast.com. And you can visit me at any point to figure out what else I'm doing at justinmcroberts.com. There's a whole lot of .coms going on there. If you would like to join the small army of folks who are making this podcast happen, not only this season, past seasons, but also future seasons, visit patreon.com and just search my name, Justin McRoberts. Until next time.